And welcome back to Open Your Eyes, and we're moving right into our first segment for the morning. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Labor, Local Government and Rural Development here with us. We've got reps in to discuss trade license reform. As a matter of fact, in with us, we've got Khalid Belisle, who is the mayor of Belmopan. We also have Ishmael Quiroz, who is the executive director, economic development, public-private desk in the office of the Prime Minister. My gosh, good morning. And then we also have Clifford King, who is the acting director of local government. Guys, good morning, and it's so nice to have you in.
Good morning.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Trade license reform. First, when you hear reform, it's actually to correct things, try to get things back in a better perspective. Let's talk about this trade. What is trade license, by the way? Because there are a lot of folks out there would hear about it, but we're not cognizant of exactly what trade license is. Anybody, jump on it.
Well, let me just quickly take that, and maybe the mayor from Belmopan can add. It's really it refers to licensing your business, and it applies only to municipalities in Belize. So you want to operate, you want to open a business within a municipal space, you're required to have a license to operate that business. So that's really what it is, having a license to operate your business.
Conceptually, for me, it's really just the opportunity to conduct business or perform a trade in any given locale. Of course, that comes with stipulations and regulations. It allows a municipality to kind of regulate the business activity which takes place within the community.
And this could be any business. This could be, I guess, our clothes fancies. You want to get to the corner of the road and you want to start to sell there. That business must be licensed as well?
Licensed, correct.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Yes.
All right.
It's also a very important part of your revenue source as a municipality. It's what helps you to be able to govern. Talk to us. We've spoken a lot about this from the Belize City perspective. It's great that we get to have the Belmopan perspective. What's the performance been like in collecting on trade license in Belmopan?
Yeah, trade license performance in terms of collections has traditionally been very high, in the 90–95 percentile for the majority of the years that we've had it instituted in the city. I can tell you that currently for the 2019 collection period, our trade license roll registers just shy of $600,000 in collectibles for the city of Belmopan. Last I checked, which was a couple days ago, I believe we were at roughly 87% collected. And it's not to say that we won't be able to collect the remaining 13. It's that in some instances, businesses have closed down since the last time we visited and the like. So you rarely get 100%, but you typically get mid to high 90s in terms of your collection.
Okay.
And of course, just to add to that, Marlene, the municipalities rely quite heavily on trade licensing. It's one of their major own source of revenue, and it's an average about 25% across the country in terms of the total trade licensing compared to your total revenues. And so they rely heavily on trade licensing.
Of course, of course. Now, Ishmael, this is one of the examples where there's a cross-cutting issue between local government and central government in looking at the establishments of business, the survival of the private sector, and also working with the local government portion. Talk to me about the involvement of your office in being able to spearhead the reform.
Great. Well, as you might know, the primary mandate of the EDC is to drive and support the implementation of improvements to the way that government administers services that have a direct impact on the ability to do business in Belize. And specifically regarding the private sector perspective in the context of trade license, while from the municipality side there might be a high level of collection, because everybody realizes that they need to pay a trade license to be able to operate in a municipality. One of the challenges facing the business community is the subjectivity, perhaps the arbitrariness, the non-standard way in which the trade license regime is administered throughout the country, whereby every municipality has their own way of determining what your trade license should be. And year on year it might change, and so that causes problems for businesses as they budget, as they try to forecast, as they try to survive. And so having a more, a more fair way, a more standard way, adds predictability and transparency, and that's something that we definitely want to benefit the business community.
So you're saying the formula for determining the trade license varies based on the municipality?
There's a specification in law as to how to derive that formula.
A part of it has to do with your rental value
Yeah,
too?
correct, correct, yeah.
Yes.
The law speaks very clearly of what it should be. It really calls for 25% of your annual rental value, which is 1/4 of your total income, if you want to put it that way. And so it's quite significant. And so the way it's applied, though, across the country, and because people realize that 25% is significant, the municipalities will tell you, listen, I can't kill the business community, so I'm going to charge 15%, I'm going to charge 10%. And so that brings in some level of subjectivity in the application.
Of course, who'll get 10 and who'll get 25.
Exactly, who gets 10, who gets 15, and that type of thing. And so this new regime is attempting to correct these types of shortcomings and to standardize the approach. And so that if we're in this type of business, and comparatively I could say, me and Ishmael, we are in the business of food preparation. I should be able to pay what Ishmael is paying, because it's across the board.
But it also has a few glitches in terms of looking at the type of businesses, because a food shack may be the same size as a law office, and the revenue coming in will be significantly different.
Right. All the more reason why what is being proposed in this new modality of calculating trade license takes into considerations the different categories of business. So businesses will be treated differently, and not only differently according to sector, but differently according to where they are within municipalities. So there are different zones within municipalities, developed from very developed to undeveloped areas. And so naturally you'd expect that the cost to operate in those specific areas differs based on the type of business also that's proposing to operate.
So I'm sure you guys are able to do a breakdown of this, and we would like to use this medium to do that. A reason for that is because we know that these small businesses, then again businesses on a whole, are watching right now, hearing about this reform, and would like to know exactly what this reform is. So let's do a breakdown from business to business, calmly, so that folks could get the sense or understanding of what it is.
Well, what will really happen, John, is that the municipalities over the next 3 months or so will be embarking on an exercise to collect data on the various types of business. So let's put it into layman's terms. The businesses will be classified into different sectors, and we have 20 different sectors that are used to classify businesses, and it's based on an international standard. And so that if you're in the accommodation business, a hotel, an apartment, and so on, you'll be treated as such. But also, depending on where you are in the municipality, we know that within our municipal spaces, there are different levels of development. There are areas that are highly commerce, the infrastructure is there, the traffic flow is reasonable, or it's okay. And then there are those areas where we have less of those amenities. So if you're in the accommodation business and you're in, say, a zone 1 that is highly developed, you will have a different cost per square footage than an accommodation business in a zone 4 where the amenities are not there to support your business, and so you'll pay a lower cost per square footage, which then speaks to what your annual rental value will be. And so those are the type of distinctions that we'll be making, so that if I'm in the accommodation business in downtown, we should all be paying the same cost per square footage. That will determine our rental value, which will then determine our trade licensing fee. And so it is that type of distinction. And so over the next 3 months, we will be conducting an exercise within the municipalities to collect data on a very important aspect of determining cost per square footage, which is your productive footprint, your usable square footage. So that for business purposes, this is my productive space, not my restroom, not my parking lot, not my stairways, but the actual space that I use to produce the goods or services that I provide. And so that over the next 3 months, we'll be collecting data on your productive space that will determine your cost per square footage, which leads to your rental value, which leads to your fee.
And that point is quite important because we definitely want to allay any concerns or fears on the part of the businesses that they're going to be, that we're taking measurements of their space, but including a lot of these things that they have invested in to ensure the comforts of their customers. But then because they're investing in that, they're going to be charged more. To the contrary, we want to encourage investment in things like parking lots and such amenities without penalizing. So only your productive footprint is going to be actually measured, and that is what goes towards the calculation of our annual rental value. So it's a matter of collecting that updated information, which will then feed into the new way of administering trade license.
Talk to me about the zoning and what methodology will be used. Because I hear one thing and an example comes to my mind. Renting a property in a non-popular space will be cheaper, but I have parking. But if I'm in a congested area, I don't have parking. So there's an additional expense, there are more challenges. So how do you distinguish what zone or how the zones will be categorized and the amenities will change oftentimes counter to what people are paying for the space in the first place?
Well, that zoning it's a work in progress that each municipality will have to undertake individually. Like Ishmael mentioned, there are 4 zone categories as currently proposed. Zone 1 being a highly developed area, so you're looking at an area, maybe the streets are paved, you know, they have ready access to electricity, you know, to your utilities. It's a highly trafficked area, so Albert Street in Belize City, for example, Constitution Drive in Belmopan, Forest Drive in Belmopan. So that's highly developed, and then you have developing, so maybe not quite at the same level in terms of amenities as well as trafficability, attractability in terms of people actually wanting to go into that area for commercial purposes. The third zone would be emerging, so at an even lower level in terms of what's available, and then the fourth and final one would be undeveloped. So basically it's almost starting from scratch, maybe a new subdivision in your municipality, a subdivision that might even have been in existence for some time but hasn't seen any sort of improvements per se. So that's the zoning aspect of it. It's such that once this new regime is implemented later this year, a business owner should be able to say, go maybe onto the council's website and say, okay, what zone do I fall in? And these things will be clearly demarcated both visually as well as by the letter, word by word. What street forms what the northern boundary, the southern boundary, etc. Should be able to go onto our council's website, determine what zone they're in, determine what classification their business falls into of the 20 that we're proposing, find the cost per square foot for that business in that zone, and automatically be able to determine what their trade fee for the year should be based on those set parameters.
Cost per square foot. Now, does change, especially when it comes to municipalities. Let's say San Pedro, which is booming. Then you've got Belize City, which we consider to be the economical hub. Then there is the capital city, Belmopan, the tourist attraction of San Ignacio and the Cayo district. Then again, you've got the Toledo district. That is, you know, it's a little distant out. So we do go there, but at minimally, how do we vary this? How do we get this dealt with?
That's a very good question, John, a very relevant question as a matter of fact. And the truth of the matter is that it will be different based on the municipalities that we're in. And as a matter of fact, you rightly said, the economic activity in Belize City is a lot higher than in PG, than in Benke. And so the cost per square footage for a particular business type in Belize City will likely be higher than the cost per square footage for a same business type in Toledo or in PG or in Benke. And that has to do with the level of economic activity in these areas. And so, yes, that will be different. And so what will happen that every council will then establish in law a matrix of its cost per square footage in accordance to the business type and the location. And so so if I want to run an accommodation business in Punta Gorda, the cost per square footage for that type of business in PG will be different than the cost per square footage for that same type of business in Belize City. So you have your question is very relevant, and that is the approach that we're going to take. And so the data that we're collecting now will inform that information. And so all of this will be published. Business owners, new entrants into the business world will be able to go to documentation to see what that matrix is saying and be able to calculate their own rental value. The idea of this initiative is that we should have less intrusion from the council into the business, and so that the businessman does not feel like every time I turn around, there's someone from the municipality assessing my business. We're attempting to eliminate that type of intrusion.
If I could just shed some further light on the method by which we propose to identify what the cost per square footage is across sectors in each municipality, using the data that's going to be collected, is that by looking at the municipality's rent book data and information, and as we categorize categorize businesses into their different sectors, what we want to identify is which business in those municipalities are most compliant in terms of meeting the 25% as legislated by the Trade License Act.
Okay.
So identifying, based on what they pay in trade license, who is most compliant or closest to that 25%. And so that's pretty much the base, right? The trade license. You divide that by the cost per, or their square footage, actually. You divide it by their cost per square footage, so what is measured to be their updated cost per square footage, and then you find the cost per square footage for that sector in that municipality. And therefore, you then use that to calculate the rest of the formula to determine what the trade license is. So it's one method, or the method, in which the cost per square footage for different sectors across different municipalities is going to be determined using the data.
No, you know, businesses in general, they're unique in nature. And I think that some people have found innovative ways to be able to simplify conducting businesses, and some people make a larger investment, more accommodating the clients that they're going to serve. Let's use an example. If I decide I want to sell food out of my house, or just a food shack, and then my neighbor decides that they want to put up some chairs and tables and give them a bit of an ambiance. The investment is completely different. The property size is completely different. But what we might be making is the same, except one may have more expenses. How do you accommodate for some of these nuances when you're talking, and especially because the point is to keep businesses surviving across the country, whether in PG or San Pedro. How do you fit that into the calculations that you want to formalize?
Mir, are you able to?
Well, those type of examples are ideal, and I'll tell you something. While we're attempting to work on this regime, we can't say that it can address every nuance that we're going to talk about. But I could tell you that in that particular example that you gave, you as a business person have made a choice that you want to prepare food, create a space for your customers to sit and so on. And so what you have done is to increase your productive space. You're in the food business, and so if I only have a kitchen, that's my productive space. I sell my food and my food is to go. But when I'm allowing customers to come in and sit, then I have increased my productive space. And so that space too shall be measured as part of your productive space. And so your total square footage for creating that space and having that kitchen goes up.
Yeah, but you see where the imbalance is in that example.
I think there's also the potential, though, for it for those two businesses to fall into different categories.
Okay.
Maybe one might be food preparation and one might be entertainment, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to look at those details. Those details when the data is being collected, for it to be totally deciphered, and so that when the actual matrix is published, it will address those types of nuances.
I think something to keep in mind, even when we get to the implementation phase of this new reform initiative, is that it's still not going to be perfect. It's still not going to be ideal for everybody involved. I'll tell you, I mean, this is something that started back in 2014. So we've been at this for 5 years now.
Yeah. Wow.
Several different proposed methodologies, had to go back to the drawing board several times, and now settling on this one and seeing what results this one will yield. So it's just important that we keep in mind that it's not going to be perfect now,
every scenario,
probably, for every single scenario.
I know, but it's very little comfort to the one who feels disadvantaged. But let me just ask, because this is where this fits in. What is the consultation that will take place?
Yes.
How are the businesses? And not just Chamber, because although Chamber is a formidable organization, there's some who are too small to subscribe to the bigger organizations. How are you going to ensure that businesses have a say in being able to have you understand how their business works and what it's costing them to stay open?
Right. So there's already been extensive consultation with a broad cross-section of the private sector. It should be said and noted that the Chamber really was pushing for this to happen, and so kudos to them for for wanting an improved way of doing things. But apart from consultation with the chamber, we've actually gone out to individual businesses and done one-on-one sessions with different sizes of businesses to really get their input, to identify some of these nuances, to identify what they, from practical experience, know are going to be challenges in terms of what their business, how their business is different. And the very interesting thing is that there's broad support for what is being proposed. And that goes right across from the business community to the municipalities to the Ministry to the Economic Development Council.
And what's the biggest appeal that you're hearing from the private sector?
I want to say, Marlene, that I think the biggest concern for the private sector has to do with predictability. And this regime certainly brings...
Because you can't forecast if you don't know what you'll have to pay for your trade license.
That has been the biggest concern, and I think that this new regime addresses predictability. One of the things that that this new regime will certainly add to your business is that it will be predictable for a 3 to 4 year period. We are yet to determine whether it's 3 or 4 years. Cabinet will make that decision. But once you pay a fee starting January 2020, that will be locked in for 3 to 4 years, whether you increase the size of your business or not. The reassessment don't come until down the road. And so you don't have to worry that every year the council will be coming in to do a reassessment. And so as a businessman, I can forecast for 3 years or 4 years to say, my trade license fee will be this amount, whether I improve or increase my business space or not. And so that's the type of approach that this regime is taking.
But is there any, just one question, in looking at the categories, we hear very often, we have Beltrade, we have all these different representatives coming in talking about entrepreneurship, talking about small micro businesses. Is there any consideration for new businesses in looking at what category they'll fall under? I've heard very often from business owners, you're just starting up. You're trying to make back just a smidgen of what you've spent on your business, and you got all these fees you have to pay. So survival is hard from the onset.
No, we'll certainly make a pitch for Cabinet to consider having some sort of waiver, a first-year waiver, a grace period, or something like that. That maybe we have to run the numbers to see what could be possible, because very importantly, this new initiative needs to be revenue neutral, to the municipalities. As we started off with, it's significant revenue for the municipalities, and we can't cut from the town and city councils. So we have to look at that and determine what then might be possible to offer some sort of relief or benefit to new small businesses.
One of the things that came out of what you said, Mr. King, is the period. Like, for instance, the amount of years that, okay, this is all you'll be paying for this timeline, which I think would bring some reluctance to one's mind, especially for those in business, that I'm afraid to grow my business because I'm not sure what 3 to 4 years afterwards, what that will bring for me in terms of my payments. Now, are we looking at this? And I think this is very important, because we want for folks to expand, but at the same time, me expanding and not knowing what I'll get myself into in terms of my payments down the road. Expansion is very...
Maybe we should just clarify that, General.
If I might, John, I think what we're looking at implementing perfectly addresses that concern, because you would have known what the set rate for your business is, and you can kind of project a little forward in terms of any potential increases. If you're talking about just increasing amount of square footage, total square footage, then you should be able to say, well, if I'm adding on 1,000 square feet, it will add roughly 1,000 times cost per square foot, maybe with a slight increase in cost per square foot factored in. From the municipality's perspective, and I'll tell you because my colleagues discuss this quite openly, what this allows businesses to do is to plan when you're going to do that expansion, such that you do it immediately after an assessment period has been locked, has been done, and your rate has been locked in. It gives you, if you complete your expansion within a year's period, it gives you 2 years at the old rate, whereas now you're operating in a bigger space. I mean, you have to accept these realities. We know this going in.
And I don't know how the challenge is in Belmopan, but I'll use the Belize City example. one of the things that we see happening is how businesses are migrating beyond city limits, beyond municipality limits.
Yeah.
Because, well, it's just a lot cheaper to do business.
Of course.
What's the long-term plan? And I know it's outside of the municipality scope, but to ensure that there's equitable treatment, and especially when you're just talking about a few hundred yards, a few miles beyond a municipality as we spread out.
Well, you know, Marlene, businesses are not necessarily only moving to areas outside of municipalities, current municipalities, because of the conditions within those municipalities, but also because of the growing population in these suburban areas, these rural areas. Lady Bank, for example, that's a growing commercial area. And so there's a natural attraction for the businessman to want to move there. And having not to pay a trade license is a greater incentive. And so the long-term plan in the Ministry of Local Government is also to look at trade licensing in the rural areas. The villages are in need of revenue. The only source of revenue they have at this time is from liquor licensing, and they are looking for more revenue. They want to do more in terms of their village development. And so in the ministry, we are also looking at supporting the National Association of Village Councils to address trade licensing. And also we're looking at urbanizing in terms of township for certain suburban rural areas.
Like establishing new towns.
Towns, exactly. So
when's the last time we did that?
San Pedro, 1984. That's the last one.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it's been a while, over 35 years or so. So there is a need to move in that direction. The peninsula, the Bay Vistas, the Santa Cruz. I was telling these gentlemen about the amount of commercial activity in Santa Cruz at that Placencia Junction with the Southern Highway. It's amazing what is happening there. And you walk into that community and the amount of commercial activity, the same services you can get in Belmopan, you can get in that area.
Wow. Independence the same.
Independence, you know, so.
On the same topic, I can picture my colleagues from Orange Walk and San Ignacio, Mayors Bernard and Trop, now talking about municipal boundaries and the fact that they're offering services into areas that technically don't fall within their municipalities. And so municipal boundaries exercise is also something that's very high on the agenda of the Belize Mayors Association at this point in time, looking at trying to make sure that these areas are captured within your boundaries so that the areas that you're offering services to will also return some fashion of revenue to the municipality.
Yeah. What's the timeline that we're looking at to be able to roll out the reform?
We have an effective date of January 1st, 2020, which will be the new trade year.
Okay.
And so we have a string of activities that we are attempting to complete by September so that the legislation can be put in place, so that the councils can then, by November of this year, send out the new assessments.
So you're talking about zoning being done by then?
And a lot of this back work has already started. A lot of this has already started. As a matter of fact, like, as Mayor Belisle said, we've been having this discussion since 2014. And so a lot of the work has already been done, and it's just a matter now of officially, and of course, along with these amendments in terms of the rental value, we're looking at some other key amendments. For example, establishing a tribunal to hear appeals. To hear grievances. If you don't feel that you're being exactly, you can go
charged.
to a tribunal, and there's a process for how the tribunal is to hear cases and to report and to respond to cases. So we're putting those types of mechanisms in place. And so
these require legislative changes, though.
Absolutely.
Yes. And we have the commitment to be able to follow through with that?
Yes, indeed.
We certainly have that commitment. Full commitment. As a matter of fact, Mayor Belisle is here representing the Belize Mayors Association, and we have gotten full commitment from to work this new regime.
Which area is most challenged by being able to formalize their trade license system? What would you say?
In terms of municipality?
We're talking about Mayors Association.
From the Ministry of Local Government standpoint, I think that the greatest challenges has to do with those councils that perhaps have the lowest level of capacity in terms of the institutional capacity to implement the structures. I will tell you frankly that Belize City has the highest capacity, and that goes along a continuum across the municipality. And of course, we have municipalities that are booming. The St. Ignatius, the Orange Walks, those areas are expanding significantly. And so as we progress with municipal development, we are beginning to see a growth in the capacity that municipalities are getting over the years. And so it's a continuous process, and it's going to be a drawn-out process. But we're getting there.
So we're seeing a rise in businesses across the country.
Yes. One of the things, following up on Mr. King's point, from the municipal perspective, we're realizing or coming to grips with the fact that there's a large informal sector operating out there, and it's not fair to the people who are captured within what we're already doing in terms of charging for trade licenses. And so we joke about it all the time. I mean, it seems that there's a new taco shop popping up on every other corner every other week, you know, and it's unfair to the established businesses. I can hear one business owner on the phone in my ear right now, a restaurant owner in Belmopan, you know, expressing their frustration that, you know, they've made the investment, they've taken the time to grow their business, and they feel like their legs are being cut out from under them with the sudden rise of all these informal establishments that aren't even captured within the confines of the system. No?
A part of it goes to the ease of doing business and the ease of, you know, formalizing. And so through an improved and a more predictable way of issuing, for example, the trade license, we hope to be able to attract some of those informal businesses into the formal sector. It's actually in their benefit. You know, they do require trade licenses to access bank accounts, you know, to access certain services that the trade license actually, you know, provides. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for them. And
attract them, not mandate them? Is that what you're saying? And so basically, people who just set up shop anywhere in the municipality isn't required to have.
There's always going to be, you know, people trying to get away from it, you know. And so I suppose it's going to be a blend of both approaches. The idea, though, is for people to really just see the value in this, comply, and proceed.
And so ultimately, all of that really rests with the municipality. And one of the things that I wanted to add quickly to that capacity that I'm speaking about is that our municipalities are moving significantly towards digitization. They are moving towards e-governance and e-government, and those municipalities that are farther along that line are able to have better management and administrative control of the municipal space. And so we have now Mayor Belisle will tell you that he can be sitting right here and he can check the accounts of his council and know what is going on, so he can make better decisions with his council about things that has to do with the control of the municipal space, and so that is important.
I'm glad you brought up that point, because that's one thing that's been nagging me in my brain this entire conversation. How are we thinking about this in the future perspective? If we look at what's happening in the market in the US, for example, physical stores are closing down. Everybody's moving online. We see here in Belize where people just post stuff online, deliver it. They have a business, they're making money. And if you consider it where someone is investing in a space and then has to be very careful about how much space they'll use because there's a property square foot calculation we put in place, it's going to be harder and harder to survive. So in terms of looking forward to the future, how are we accommodating for the online market that is growing?
I think we're certainly preparing for that, or setting the stage to figure out how to deal with e-business. And interestingly enough, within the proposed amendments to the Trade License Act, there are certain new definitions, and one of them is what is e-commerce, what is e-business, and a specific category for that.
So if I were to fast forward to next January, I think we can wager a bet here that there'll be people coming out and saying, and they took up my trade license fees and they didn't tell me anything about it. Because some people will probably end up paying more.
And some will probably end up paying less.
Yes.
There's a balance there.
So what do you say to businesses at this point in time in ensuring that they are a part of the process and that they can be aware of what will happen come January 2020?
But one key part of it is something that Mr. King alluded to earlier. There's an exercise that each municipality is now tasked with carrying out, which is basically visiting each business in your municipality physically to come and do the measurements per se. And so that means businesses must be notified, they must be aware. Hopefully they are present when these things are being done, so they can see for themselves that the proper spaces are being included, and the spaces that Mr. King talked about, your restrooms, your lobbies, your staircases, your parking lots, if it's not used to generate money, are excluded from the calculation. So businesses should be well aware of what is happening come January 2020 and know what their rates ought to be well in advance of the new collection period starting.
And just for the record, if I'm trying to start a business tomorrow, how do I apply? What do I have to do to get a trade license?
Well, I believe each council kind of handles it differently. There's an application process that you go through. There is a trade license board established for each municipality. I believe the mayor is the chairman of the board in each case. That board comprises members of the business community, but it also comprises members of various agencies such as the Public Health Department, the Department of the Environment, the Fire Department, the Police Department. You should have your building unit or your engineering folks from your council in on that as well, your valuation people from your council in on your board. So it's a process that you go through. These agencies will typically visit the site that you're proposing to conduct your business to make sure that it passes their standards and is up to scratch. No? So it's a process that you go through. One of the things that we're trying to improve on is the speed which that process occurs. Typically, our average across the country, I believe, is 20 days. The trade licensing process is taking at present, on average. Not necessarily that same case in every municipality.
Can I just interject here and ask if there'll be some formalization of the Trade License Board as well? You know, we've heard accusations of political appointees, slow processes, not meeting enough.
The boards are appointed by the municipality. In this case, the mayor appoints, as the local authority, they appoint their board. The only board for the municipalities that are appointed by the ministry is the liquor licensing board. Well, of course, and the evaluations appeals board. But in terms of revenue source boards, if you could call them that, the councils appoint their trade licensing board. And that will remain under the new regime. And the idea about it is that we bring the autonomy closer to the local level, so that the municipality knows who are the actors within the municipal space. And also, an amendment to the law is that it will name the persons who are to be on the board. So you don't arbitrarily just pick Marlene to be a board member, but it has a name, a valuer.
A category.
You know,
so there'll be specific roles to fill.
Exactly.
And interestingly, what's contemplated in going forward is perhaps a slight shift in the function of what the board does, away from actually determining your trade license value, because that's going to be taken care of by the standard methodology, to more looking at the planning, the municipal development side of things.
Whether or not we need 5 of the same
Exactly.
on one street.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But one of the things, just to address a concern, I believe the law presently calls, Mr. King can correct me if I'm wrong, presently calls for quarterly meetings of the board. So 4 meetings for the year, basically, which doesn't necessarily fit everyone's schedule in terms
that means
of
it's definitely more than 20 days then.
When you're planning to roll out. Well, I mean, from the time you actually, from the time it's considered at the board to being granted, allowing agencies time to be able to visit and the like, there is something called a special meeting, which of course incurs a fee that you can apply for in order to
speed up the process.
Yes, expedite the process if possible. But typically the law calls for 4 meetings a year, no?
Okay. All right. Well, this is very interesting, and I appreciate you coming in to tell us about it at this stage. And as you said, you were trying to get everyone as involved as possible. So when representatives of your municipality show up at your business and want to measure your space, understand that it is a part of this process. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
If we could just add, the exercise for Belize City starts on April 15th and runs till about the 27th.
Okay.
And certainly the appeal is to collaborate and know that this is all for an improved way of doing business.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, our conversation starts with our first-time voters. So stay tuned.